Joining our webinar, Culture Matters. Today, we will explore the evolution of culture into what we're now seeing as hybriculturalism. We'll then delve into methods for identifying cross-cultural insights that can be used to inform total market strategies. A copy of the Culture Matters report and a link to view a recording of this webinar will be emailed to all attendees once the session has concluded. Presenting today is Hall & Partners Multicultural Director, Khalil Vicioso. Khalil is a qualitative researcher who specializes in multicultural and youth segments. Of Dominican descent, born and raised in New York City, he has been a lifelong observer and participant of the global cultural exchange. Now he uses his expertise and experience to inform strategies for Fortune 500 companies conducting research throughout North and South America. Now, without further ado, we will hand off to Khalil, who will begin the presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We'll jump right in, and I will first tell you a bit about what we're going to be doing, what we'll be covering today. We'll first start very briefly talking about shifting paradigms that's led to what Jordan spoke of as hybriculturalism, then talk a little bit about what the key drivers of that are, and finally, the opportunities for brand and the idea of identifying crossover insights and how one goes about doing that in order to maximize this cultural dynamic. Hybriculturalism we think of as this blending of influences through cultural fluidity. And what we've seen is three shifting cultural paradigms over the last couple of decades. So from monoculturalism, which you may think of as sort of assimilation or westernization, to multiculturalism, which was the focus on different cultures and the appreciation of those cultures, the recognition that people really valued their cultures and weren't necessarily in a hurry to assimilate or to westernize. There were aspects of their cultures that they valued. So there was a new sort of found sense of pride in those cultures. And then hybriculturalism, which is the recognition that all along cultures have been influencing each other and that people are borrowing from different cultures as they develop a sense of who they are and as their cultures develop. Hybriculturalism now, just a little more on the definition here. It's really, while it is about this fusion or this incorporating of different cultures through fluidity, there is an aspect of it that's equally important, which is the idea of maintaining strong ties to heritage. It's about the reinventing of heritage, of modernizing it, and bringing in elements from other cultures. And what we've seen with that is the rise of sort of three different types of social phenomenon, social cultural phenomenon. One is social cultural empowerment. So now we're in a situation where we see Indians really embracing a sense of being Indian, Chinese really embracing a sense of being Chinese, and in the US, Hispanic really embracing a sense of being Hispanic, and not wanting to move away from that, but wanting to embrace it and wanting to interpret that in a way that they feel is modern while not necessarily meaning that it's more Western. We've also seen the rise of what we think of as a shorthand as South-South influence, but really it's about the idea that areas that had been thought of as net cultural importers have really now become cultural exporters and are sharing that with each other. So one example of that is the rise of K-pop in Latin America and how widely and how popular that grew in different countries, such as Colombia, where they had a TV show and had Facebook around it. That was really helping to drive this phenomenon, but was also picking up on the cultural zeitgeist, where it had really been fully embraced. And the same you see with the export of Latin rhythms and Latin music and Latin food to places in Southeast Asia and to China and to Japan and to other places around the world. Another thing that we see happening is this rise of possible selves. And what we mean by this is that people are able to imagine and to actualize a greater number of possible selves. They have more opportunities to reinvent themselves and to really contribute to reinventing society. So in the past, the collective imagination was often an escape because people's roles were more prescribed. They were more limited in the things that they could do or the resources they had at hand. Now, the collective imagination really allows people to reimagine society and their role within it. And this is due to the resources that they have at hand, which is access to technology, social media, different influences, mass media. So there are different ways, there are different sources of influence, but then there are also different ways that they can activate those possible selves. So in essence, this is about the rise of hybridity. Western American cultures continue to be an important influence, but it's now being integrated into cultural forms that celebrate and modernize tradition. And this picture is just sort of an exemplar of what that looks like, say, in skater culture. So what's driving this? There are 6 key drivers. One is the movement of people. So this is about migration and immigration. One is about technology and infrastructure and the spread of those. The flow of goods, the spread of information and ideas, social media, and the flow of capital. We'll go through each one of these briefly, giving an example from one area of the world, from one region of the world, just to sort of highlight what we're talking about here. And one point that's important here is that what it looks like will differ from market to market, depending on how these different drivers interact with each other, as well as what the local conditions on the ground are. So political structures make a difference in how free communication is. While people have workarounds for it, that's definitely one of the considerations and one of the things that impacts how this global dynamic looks at a local level. So let's talk about the movement of people. One example of this is the presence of Hispanics spreading across the US. While everybody talks about the spread of the growth of the Hispanic population, one of the really important aspects of that growth is where it's happening. And this is the spread throughout the US. So in places where we hadn't seen it before, so say Arkansas or Tennessee or Indiana or South Dakota, that have seen over 100% growth in their Hispanic populations over the last couple of years. So what this means is that it's not just the spread of numbers, and it's not just people moving around, it's also the spread of that cultural influence to different parts of the country where we hadn't seen that influence in a pronounced way before. In other areas of the world, what we're seeing is a lot of migration from rural to urban areas or between different urban areas. And again, that is the spread of influence from one area of a country to another area of a country. The flow of goods. So here, what we've seen is, and this has been going on forever, I always think about Levi's and remembering that the importance of Levi's jeans during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, having Levi's jeans in the Soviet bloc, in the areas of the world that were part of the Soviet bloc, was not just about denim. It was also a symbol. It was a signifier of freedom. It was associated with freedom of speech. It was associated with rock. It was associated with all those elements that they didn't have access to through the legitimate channels. So there was a big black market for goods like Levi's jeans because of those associations. So goods not only are these material things that we exchange, but they also have important symbolic value. And here the example we see is this kind of exporting of Tex-Mex food, which really, if you think about it, is a hybrid itself. It's neither Mexican nor is it sort of Southern. It's really kind of its own thing, exported to Japan. And here there's a promotion that happens with an anime character, with an anime show that they use in order to promote the show. And here, interestingly, I think about this as a campaign that could probably be effective in Latin America, where Tex-Mex food would be seen as something pretty different and maybe even American, and anime is actually taken off. It's one of the examples we talk about later, but there's a huge fan base for anime in Latin America. So I keep imagining this would actually do quite well there. And the spread of technology and infrastructure. And here, one of the things that we've seen and people have talked about a lot is the way that emerging markets are leapfrogging. So they're primarily moving to a mobile-first way of accessing the internet and accessing digital content. We see some examples. So for example, in Kenya, cell phone owners, 68% of them regularly make and receive payments on their phone. 67% of internet users in Mexico are accessing it daily through their mobile devices. 81 of China's internet connectors, people connected in China, are connected via mobile devices. And interestingly, we see Hispanics in the US have mirrored this leapfrogging trend. They are also mobile first, and not just them, but also we see that with other multicultural audiences, such as African American and even Asian American. They've become mobile first in terms of how they access digital content and the internet. The flow of capital. We often talk about the spread of Hispanic spending power. And we've seen 550% growth between 1990 and 2015, which is significant growth in a relatively short period of time. But the things to pay attention to are where that then gets spent. And where we see it is, 58% growth in home ownership between 2001 and 2013, which really out-indexed what was going on in the general population significantly. And that's through the crash of the housing bubble. We also see they're 93% higher than the overall industry rate to replace their car in the last couple of years. And they're doing it at the same average price as other car consumers are doing. And these categories are important because they're indicators of a lot of secondary spending. So when you buy a new home, you also buying a lot of goods that go with that home, whether it's appliances or whether it's furniture or the smaller items that go into filling a household. And the same with cars. They're an indicator of fuel spend. They're an indicator of other spending that goes along with having a car. We see this happening globally, where luxury brands are now starting to take a much closer look at the trends that are emerging in China, for example, as it is by 2015, so by the end of this year, will represent a third of global luxury spending. So what luxury means and how luxury is interpreted in China becomes important for the way that luxury brands are positioning themselves. And one of the arguments that we're making here is that it shouldn't just be impacting how they position in China, but that there's also room to start taking a step back and thinking about what are the insights from China that will carry over, that will cross over and resonate beyond China, that will resonate in the US, that will resonate in Latin America among luxury consumers. And the converse is true as well. What are the insights around luxury coming out of these markets that would actually have some resonance in China? The spread of information and ideas, and this is really something that, and you can start to see how all of these are interrelated, because you need social media, you need the spread of technology and infrastructure in order to really get to this spread of information and ideas. And ideas are not just those intellectual ideas, but it's also pop culture ideas and trends and themes and memes that are spreading through the culture. And so the picture that we use here, we use because whenever I've asked people where this picture takes place, they often think it takes place in LA, which makes a lot of sense. But actually, this picture was taken in Japan. And so here what we're seeing is the spread of Cholo culture into Japan and its adoption by youth in Japan as one of the cultural memes that they're picking up from the US and from Latin Americans specifically in the US. And really speaks to the way that you have these cultural memes, these ideas, that are being spread. Social media, which we sort of been touching on throughout, but here a little bit drilling down more specifically. It's really connecting people in different parts of the world, and it's allowing people who've immigrated to the US from Latin America to remain connected with relatives in Latin America. And we'll see an example of a brand in Asia that is allowing people who've immigrated from rural areas to remain connected with people back home. And so it's allowing people to bridge those ties of tradition. So more collectivist cultures are able to keep that aspect of their culture alive using the very modern technology in order to do that, to overcome physical proximity. And it's also, again, one of the main areas where ideas and where cultural memes are being spread. So what does this mean for brands? And here it opens up 4 possibilities. One is for brands to become a bridge between tradition and modernity. Another is to be a bridge to exploration and to adoption. Another is for brands to be hybricultural themselves. And then finally, for brands to adopt either a more global or a more local stance, to be global versus local champions. And let's explore each of these. So here an example, WeChat, Chinese social networking and messaging app that brought tradition into the digital age, allowing people to send virtual red envelopes to their family and friends on New Year's. So this is a tradition of sharing red envelopes with family and friends that people are able to do now virtually. So even if you've moved away, I can still have this tradition. And this is something that gets done on major holidays, such as on Chinese New Year's. And they've also upped the ante on it. So they created a chat room where people are able to go in and win a lottery, to win a red envelope. So they've added a new twist to this tradition through the use of this modern technology. Oh, 1 second. Okay. Another example here is North Face. And North Face really shows how a brand can be a bridge to cultural exploration and adoption. So what they did was they saw that the idea of knowing where North is was really kind of a way of saying knowing where you are in life and knowing where you're headed. And they used that to build a campaign that they called Finding True North, where they introduced an idea that really wasn't part of Chinese culture per se, going out into the woods, going out into nature in order to kind of find yourself or just to get away from things. Because the aspiration is always to be more urban as opposed to being out in the woods or out in nature. But they capitalized on two phenomena. One is with the rapid urbanization, that people are actually looking now for an escape from just the sheer number of people that they're around. So they want some space. And the other aspect is with the pressure to succeed and to achieve, people often need just a time to get away, a little bit of a break, so to speak, a different type of adventure. And so they were able to really get people to participate in this idea of let's go find True North, and this became an event where people would go out and they'd go hiking and they'd go camping, but they also built in social elements to it, which was checking in at different points where you are and being able to find achievement that way. But now this was in a completely different domain of their lives, and in a way that was more fun. It wasn't about necessarily achieving upward mobility. You're still achieving social status, but not necessarily upward mobility in the same way. Another example here is the brands being hybricultural themselves. And this Haagen-Dazs example, I was having an interesting conversation with a client who mentioned, this was introduced to the market a little while ago, and I said, yes, but the reason that we always talk about it is because it introduced a flavor into the U.S. flavor profile and became commonplace relatively quickly. So, Haagen-Dazs introduced this in Argentina as their test market. It succeeded beyond where they thought it would succeed. They brought it into the U.S. specifically to target less acculturated Hispanic, but it became the fastest growing new product innovation that they had ever introduced and continues to have that distinction. But after that, it was followed by dulce de leche, just about everything. So dulce de leche Girl Scout cookies and dulce de leche for every brand that we're used to now has sort of dulce de leche Cheerios and dulce de leche other products. And so this became now a common flavor profile. We find it everywhere, and it's something that people are used to, and it's almost become just kind of part of the American flavor profile. Dulce de leche has introduced itself into that, and it really shows it's a great example of a brand being hybricultural and introducing something that then becomes adopted in an almost unconscious way. People are not really thinking that they're adopting something from a different culture. It just becomes a flavor that is now part of our flavor profile. An example, and this one is an interesting one, where Corona went into Asia, into Southeast Asia, looking for growth there, and initially thought that they would position themselves as a premium import brand because it was the mentality of more and faster and better. But what they found was that there's actually a really important cultural tension here. People need an escape from more and faster and better. They need a time to just be with their friends. They need a time when they can actually just kind of let their hair down, so to speak. And we're able to go back to their initial positioning, which was this idea of letting the world wait, taking time to be with the people, making that moment that you're socializing as important as the moment when you have to go and accomplish something that's quote unquote more productive. So bringing in something from a different culture that helped to resolve a cultural tension in the market where they were looking to grow. And the result for them was 34% growth between 2011 and 2012 relative to the industry standard, which was about 5 or 6%. Brands can be global champions, and of course the kind of hallmark of that is Coca-Cola, who's able to stand for both this idea of spreading happiness and in some ways a sort of particularly American sense of optimistic, we can do things, we're all in it together, happiness, and at the same time be seen as a very local and very accessible to everybody around the world. So everybody makes Coca-Cola their own. So they're a global champion. They're a champion of a value that, while maybe initially inspired by a US sensibility, becomes something that's adopted around the world and taps into a sensibility that's aspirational to everybody. And increasing brands can also become local champions. And here we see an example of Tata Tea, which is really about local brands knowing their customers best and leveraging the associations that come with being a local brand, which is about expertise, which is about craft, which is about knowing the earth and knowing where things come from and how this is prepared in a traditional way and how it's prepared properly, becoming your calling card. And it's growing as a result, not just in India, but Tata Tea is big beyond India, and part of that has to do with the authenticity that's associated with it. So some key takeaways. One, the idea of total market, which we speak of specifically to the US, is really a call to action. And the underlying dynamic of that call to action is hybriculturalism. It's a paradigm shift in the US that's reflective of a broader global dynamic with local manifestations. So we think about it in the US as important for brands becoming more total market, having total market strategies. But in essence, what we're seeing is something that's happening globally, and we believe this will become really important for brands to consider as they grow their brands, as they want to grow in different markets. To fully leverage these total market, these crossover opportunities, brands need to start by understanding cultural shifts in their category. So who's driving those shifts? Who are the cultural leaders within a specific category or in domains that are important for your category? And how do you turn those segments into the wellspring for your insights in terms of innovation, positioning, and communications? And so what we've developed is an approach to crossover insight. And where it comes from is our rootedness in a social cultural framework, which is the idea that culture frames everything ultimately. And to understand any individual consumers, you need to understand the culture that they swim in, so to speak, the culture that channels their behavior. Social is important in terms of their families, their communities, the peers. So the people that we're either following, the people that we're in opposition to, the people who are influencing us on a day-to-day basis, and then ultimately the individual with all the emotional and subconscious factors that influence their decision-making. And so to tap into that and to allow marketers to really leverage this total market dynamic, we really believe that it's about understanding culture. And to do that, we've developed a way of identifying crossover insights, which is really about, again, getting at what's the wellspring of insight within a particular category, who's driving changes within culture in this specific domain, in this specific area. How do we tap into that in a way that allows us to generate insights that will resonate beyond that specific segment without ever becoming too watered down, without ever losing that core truth. And at the same time, identifying where we need to nuance those messages, where we need to nuance those insights in order to truly tap into the broader marketplace. Ultimately, so what does this mean for brands? One is culture is evolving and dynamic, and hybriculturalism is the paradigm that brands need to really come to terms with today. To thrive in this emerging paradigm, brands need to develop richer cultural insights, and success will come from clear end-to-end solutions. So really being able to come up with solutions that tap into insight at an early stage and understand how to weave that insight throughout innovation, throughout the development of communications, throughout the development of positioning, throughout the development of brand architecture.